Star Wars 7x7, episode 2249. Today, the second half of my interview with Alex Segura, the author of Poe Dameron, Freefall. Punch it. Hey Rebel Rouser, I'm Alan Voivod, and this is Star Wars 7x7, your daily dose of Star Wars joy, and thank you so much for joining me for it. So yesterday was part 1 of 2 of the interview with Alex Segura, who is the author of Poe Dameron Freefall, and today, surprise, surprise, I've got part 2 of that interview for you. We're going to talk about Zorii Bliss, we're going to talk about Babu Frick, we're going to talk about a bunch of other things, and so before we get into that, I do just want to give a quick shout out to our friends at Audible that made it possible for me to offer you a free audiobook download and a free 30-day trial by going to sw7x7.com/audible. Sean Elias Reyes is the guy who reads Poe Dameron Freefall. We talked about that previously on the show here, and he does a great job giving you a Poe Dameron that feels a little younger, which, you know, he is in the novel, obviously, but that's how he has to be portrayed, right? And it's a great contrast to, say, Mark Thompson doing Resistance Reborn Poe Dameron, right? Or hearing Oscar Isaac do it in the theater. It gives you enough of the feel of Poe while also giving you his age, his comparative immaturity, and, you know, this incredible adventure that they go on. So Poe Dameron Freefall, great in audiobook as well as regular book, and sw7x7.com/audible is where you can get it and support the show in the process. And without further ado, here is the second half of my interview with Alex Segura, the author of Poe Dameron Freefall. Yeah. So what would you say would have been, you know, the most challenging part about writing, either for Poe, you know, who had, you know, is a known quantity, versus writing for Zorii, less of a known quantity? Like, what becomes challenging about writing for those characters for you?
I think the challenge, and it's not with a negative connotation, I think it required some work, was to really immerse myself. Like, I'm a fan, so I know the material, but also immerse myself in the Poe lore, you know, kind of seeing everything that was established in the canon and trying to find little pockets of story, you know, like characters that might resonate. Like, I really loved what Greg Rucka did in Shattered Empire, the comic series that focused on Kess and Shara Bay. And I love the short story he wrote in the book that came out right before Force Awakens. And obviously Charles Soule had a really dynamic run on the Poe Dameron comics. So it was reading all that stuff and kind of cherry-picking elements and seeing how those would play into Poe's early years. And so I guess my point is, you know, the challenge with Poe's story was that there was so much stuff to weave through and respect. You know, I didn't want people to read it and say, oh, he forgot this, or this doesn't sync up with something that came before.
Oh, yeah.
And on the, you know, like, it's a challenge. It's a challenge with any kind of shared universe IP, but you also want it to feel on its own as a great, fun adventure, you know, and I wanted it to have the rhythm of a Star Wars story. You know, I wanted people to read it and feel like, okay, this has got the action, the character development, the epic, you know, battle between good and evil, and the cool new characters, and I wanted to interject a lot of that. So that was the big balancing act, like making sure it fit into the Poe canon and the Star Wars canon in a meaningful way and added an important beat to his story, but also on its own was a really meaningful story. And as far as Zorii, I think the challenge was that it's a lot of pressure because, like you said, there's not a lot established with Zorii. So it's really, you're kind of creating something out of whole cloth, obviously in conjunction with Star Wars, but Lucasfilm, I'm sorry. But, you know, that was a little more challenging just because it's at the other end of the spectrum. You don't have as much stuff established. So it was really cool to introduce a lot of new characters that are integral to her story, like Tommaso and the Spice Runner group that Poe finds himself in. And you'll find out there's a few other ones, too, that are a lot of fun.
Yeah, and, you know, this is going to get into a little spoilery, but the novel's been out for a while, and I know that other people have been talking about this in general, so I think I'm okay. To say this. But the choice, I was really fascinated by and enjoyed the choice of portraying Zorii as Zoe Winn at the start of the story, and, you know, it was confusing and, you know, had you guessing throughout the novel to see, you know, well, what is this about? And is, you know, what kind of assumed identity is this? Is this actually her? What's going on? And so, can you talk a little bit about, you know, the genesis of that idea?
Yeah, I just wanted to I wanted to. It was a little bit of a red herring because you see Zoe Winn, and I think you first assume, okay, so she's a newish Spice Runner. Eventually, she'll become Zorii Bliss in some way. But I just wanted, like you said, I wanted to keep the readers a little bit on their toes. And so the big twist, when you see there's the big twist kind of towards I think at the beginning of the third act, you kind of realize, okay, this is all a ruse, and she's really tied into the hierarchy of the Spice Runners. I think that had more impact because we set it up from the beginning that, it's a little bit of smoke and mirrors, but I think it was played honestly. I love writing mysteries, obviously, and so I feel like you, as a reader, you're able to figure it out if you're paying attention to the little clues. There are characters that are a little overprotective of Zorii. There are villains who seem to be out to get Zorii early on before we realize like her true backstory. And so when that's revealed, it's the kind of thing where a reader will hopefully say, "Oh, wow, I can't believe I missed that."
Right. So do you think that, your experience in writing some mystery novels, private investigation novels, like, obviously you've brought that to the table. Like, is that something where it's said oftentimes enough that one of the reasons Star Wars is so successful is because it's not necessarily self-referential, that it tends to adapt from other forms of storytelling. So would you say like you specifically kind of set out to, bring that element to it in some way?
Yeah, I mean, my bread and butter is writing noir crime novels, and I definitely wanted to bring a little bit of that to Star Wars. And I also wanted to dig in and kind of show the landscape of the Star Wars criminal underworld. We have ideas, we hear about different gangs, but I wanted to really paint the backdrop of how these gangs interact with each other and what the dynamic is between, like, the Pikes or, the Spice Runners. And I introduced a few other new players onto the scene. And, so definitely, and that the Zorii reveal was a little bit of the mystery. That was the mystery that starts unfurling, and then there's more twists down the line. But the way I described this when we first announced it is that it's a crime novel in space. So you get to see corners of the Star Wars universe that maybe you aren't as familiar with, and I feel like it's much less mythical feeling. It's a little grittier, a little more grounded. There's obviously bigger elements at play, like the Empire has fallen. The New Republic is now trying to reestablish itself. So a lot of the big elements of Star Wars are there, but at its heart, it's a really kind of gritty crime novel.
Yeah, and that is actually one of the things I particularly appreciated, is that because the space in between the original trilogy and the sequel trilogy is really kind of open at this point, we don't know a heck of a lot about what's happened in those 30 years. You gave us a window into what happened with the criminal underworld that we haven't had yet. And, I'm trying to do the math off the top of my head. I think we're still a few years ahead of where The Mandalorian is with your novels. Mm-hmm. So, now we can, even see how things will be a couple of years ahead from where that TV show is going to be.
Yeah, definitely. I wanted to, like you said, that's a really unexplored area of time, that gap between Jedi and Force Awakens. And so that was liberating, but it's also, there's pressure involved because by writing this novel, which is in canon, you're kind of defining a lot of elements that are in play during that era. So you want to complement the stuff that already exists, but you also want, like I've said before, you want to create something new and entertaining on its own.
And I suppose that's where support with the story group would come in.
Yeah, for sure. They were an amazing backstop and creative partner. A lot of the story beats they were excited about, and we had a lot of great conversations about what they wanted and what certain things had to happen. And then I got to chime in and give some insight on what I wanted to happen. And it was really an exciting collaboration. And it was a great resource, and just like, hey, which I need some technical support, or I need an idea for, what planet to put here. And a lot of it was from me and my own research, but, they gave great feedback on whether it would work or not, just based on what else had been canon.
Yeah. Was there anything in the process of writing that, surprised you as you were doing it, like unexpected inspirations or for, characters or elements of the story or anything like that?
I had a blast with the new characters, and then I kind of include Zorii into that because she was such an open space in terms of creativity, just painting that picture of the Spice Runners hierarchy and creating characters like, Zorii Bliss and Tommaso and Vigilch and Gentry, like all these new characters that I felt like were, maybe I'm just it's my own bias, but I felt they were really well defined and kind of complemented Poe. And I was really fond of Sela Troon, who is the New Republic officer who plays an integral role in the story, has a very strong vendetta against the Spice Runners. So it was cool to kind of to create her and also have her play such a key part. So yeah, that was fun. I wasn't expecting to have that much freedom, and that was really cool once I started on the assignment, to realize that there was a lot of space to be creative and create new things and new elements, and then the actual work was really fun.
That's excellent, and I'm glad you mentioned Sela. I'm sorry, is it Toon? Is it Thune?
Troon.
Yeah.
Oh,
it's an R, not an H. Why was I thinking?
Yeah.
Sorry, that's my bad. My apologies.
No worries. Yeah.
But even the description of the New Republic, I mean, we talk about the Criminal Underworld and how it's evolving in the time period, but also the way the New Republic is trying to deal with everything going on, and you can see how things are starting to fray a little bit at the edges.
Yeah, I think one of the things I wanted to show is that, whether it's the Empire or it's the New Republic, criminals are going to be criminals. The Criminal Underworld is going to do what it's going to do, and they just need to pivot based on who the new boss is. And I think Jen Try says it at one point. She's like, oh, the New Republic seems very similar to the Empire in terms of how they react to the Criminal Underworld. But you also see that the reach is not as strong as it was with the Empire, which was much more, extreme in their measures. And so the New Republic's resources are not what the Empire was. And so they can't reach places like Kijimi or manage a lot of the Criminal Underworld. And so you see that kind of flourishing under the New Republic. And so I wanted to give that contrast. I also read a lot of books about organized crime as my own pleasure reading. And so that ended up informing this book, just to paint a better picture of what the criminal landscape was in Star Wars.
All right. Before we wrap up, I do have to, and I alluded to it earlier, but I have to ask about Babu Frick. So how does it feel to have added to the legacy of everyone's favorite George Smith and arguably the most popular character in the new movie?
Oh, it was awesome. It was, and he's a pretty key part of the story. At the end of the book, he comes in and kind of plays a very key role in Poe's survival, and it was fun. It just was the challenge was getting his voice right and making sure it evoked what we saw in Rise of Skywalker, and also was funny but also heartfelt. And you want to capture the essence of the character, and especially a character that's so beloved and just came out and it's kind of a phenomenon in terms of how people have responded to him. So it was a blast. It was so cool to be able to include him and to write about him.
I had the opportunity to talk with Mark Thompson, who did the audio narration for the Rise of Skywalker novelization, and asked him about Babu Frick and about how difficult was it to rein himself in, not to just completely go hog wild with the character. Did you feel a similar thing? Could you have made it an entire novel about Babu Frick if left to your own devices?
Yeah, if it was completely up to me, I guess it would have just been Babu from page one. But he's also referenced pretty early in the book, and that was done kind of for a laugh, for the fans to read and say, "Oh my God, it's Babu! He's coming!" Kind of as a teaser. Yeah. And Poe, and I'll spoil the scene because it's early in the book. Poe hears Zorii kind of gushing about Babu, and he gets jealous. He's like, "Who's this Babu character?" And of course, we the readers know that, and the people that have seen the movie. So it's just he's a big part of the book, even though his screen time isn't perpetual. He's not in there throughout, but he's a big part of all the Kijimi scenes, and that was fun.
Yeah, and I think you have basically opened the door for there to be a Babu Frick book about dating advice.
Yeah. There's a few fun lines there that I hope people will remember.
Well, it's a great novel. It's a fun novel. It's called Poe Dameron Free Fall. And for anybody who wants to keep up with your work and what you have next on your plate, where should they stay in touch with you online?
Yeah, you can find me on my website, which is alexsegura.com, or on Twitter, where I'm pretty active, which is @Alex_Segura. And I have a Facebook author page, and you can find me there as well if that's your jam.
Wonderful. Well, Alex, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to chat with me and to share all these insights about Poe Dameron Freefall with our listeners. I really appreciate it, and I hope you and all your friends and family continue to stay safe and healthy.
Likewise. Thanks so much. This was a blast.
And there you go. That's the interview with Alex Segura, the author of Poe Dameron Freefall. And check him out online. He gave you all his details there, and I'll have them on my website as well, sw7x7.com. And that is going to do it for the show today. Thank you so much for joining me for it, as always. And may the Force be with you wherever in the world you may be.
Star Wars 7x7 is not endorsed or sponsored yet by Lucasfilm Limited, Disney, or 20th Century Fox, and is intended for entertainment and information purposes only. Star Wars, the Star Wars logo, all names and pictures of Star Wars characters, vehicles, and any other Star Wars-related items are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of Lucasfilm Limited or their respective trademark and copyright holders. May the Force be with them. All original content is copyright 2020 by Star Wars 7x7. We hope you love it.